Yeah, that's what really drives, my passion is trying to get medicine back to practicing medicine and not this
Hmm.
service provider. Oh, you want this, you want that, you want your testicles
Right.
removed, you want your breast removed, whatever. I'm just here to fill orders. And egg donors, because I've done a lot of work with women who donate, and I say donate lightly because they're paid. They're not
Hmm.
donating their eggs, they're selling them.
Hmm.
They take Lupron as well. And one of my earlier films is called Eggsploitation, EGGS, Eggsploitation. And two of the women in that film had massive strokes. That was directly, I will say, was directly related to their Lupron
Yeah.
dosage that they were given, and the strokes caused them to permanently lose their own fertility. So in their selling their eggs to help somebody else have a baby, these two women will never ever be able to have their own children because we know in women all of our hormones and stuff are regulated in our brain, and their strokes were in their brain,
Ugh.
and so they will forever have to take fertility drugs because their stroke made their brains not produce the hormones that they for our cycles. And so there's so much irony, and again you think, what has happened to medicine?
Okay, thank you for joining us, everybody. Today we have Jennifer Lahl. She started the Center for Bioethics and Culture. She's a filmmaker. She's a former nurse. She's aware of many hats, apparently. And go ahead and give any further credentials or introductions you'd like.
Well, I guess I would just like to say I released my 11th documentary film 2 weeks ago, The Lost Boys, Searching for Manhood. And I think we
Awesome.
have 58,000 views already of the film. It's free online on YouTube. And just 2 days ago, my book, The Detransition Diaries, is hot off the press. So I'm
How
now
exciting.
an official author of my own book. I've written chapters in other people's books, and I've edited other people's books, but this is the first
Mhm.
time my colleague and I, Callie Fell, have written our own book, so it's exciting. Film and a book.
That's a lot to take on all at once.
Yeah, it's crazy, busy. But, I have a lot of energy, so.
Yeah, that's good. You're bringing some really powerful narratives to the forefront that have not really been covered by other people. We've heard a lot from female detransitioners, but the male detransitioners really have been left behind in this discussion, I feel like. And it's
Yeah,
really great that you're bringing forward their stories. Can you talk more about that?
yeah, I think it's really fascinating because the first film we made in the trans space was called Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender? And you always learn when you release a film or probably even a book, you learn things. And you're like, oh, that's a great idea. So when we released the film Transmission, we had included two detransition stories in that documentary film. One was a man who presented as a woman, and one was a woman who presented as a man and then detransitioned. And the audience reaction to those stories of detransitioners was powerful because I think the general public isn't aware that there are many, many people and growing that regret. So then we quickly followed that film with the releasing of the Detransition Diaries, Saving Our Sisters, which focused on three young women in the U.S. That's the genesis of this book, the Detransition Diaries. And when that movie came out, we had a flood of parents who said, please tell the story of our sons, of our boys. And so we weren't planning to make that film because we just had released the Detransition Diaries like a little over a year ago. It takes you a while to recover from making a film,
Yeah.
and you have to quickly raise the budget again to go make another film. And so we thought, well, okay, there seems to be a need here, and it was
Hmm.
clear when we were in production and listening to these young men. A lot of the stories are the same between young women and young men. You hear, stories of being on the autistic spectrum, of, some kind of a trauma in their life, being bullied, made fun of, not popular, not a cool kid. Clearly the internet plays a role in all of these young people's lives. They go online and find themselves in these rabbit holes on Reddit and Instagram, and they come into these communities where they're love bombed, and they find their new family, their glitter family. But clearly in the boys, there's something additional that is going on that we don't see in women, and that's the whole feelings around what it means to be a man. Young boys are bombarded with messages from, everything from Andrew Tate to Joe Rogan's, the gym bros, and there's there's then the rape culture and the toxic masculinity messages, and men are the problem, the patriarchy, misogyny. So they have those and when they're sorting through puberty and who they are and who they want to be, they're also hearing these messages. And so a lot of the young boys in film, they go, well, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be, perceived as a rapist or a misogynist or something like that.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think, well, maybe I should be a woman, or maybe I really am a woman, or maybe my life would be easier if I lived as a woman.
Yeah. I was just speaking with Joe Virgo about this too. And it is really alarming how these boys are just trying to find a place where they fit. Like they feel like a square peg in a round hole. Like you've got these two extremes, and they just some gentle average guy, and they don't have a place. They don't even feel secure in approaching women if they like them. Like, can I even tell a girl I like her? Is that allowed? Am I terrible? So
encroaching on her boundaries, or we actually interviewed Joe Burgos in this film that we just released.
Oh, wow.
And so he was one of the people we interviewed, because we also interviewed experts. It's an all-male cast in the film, so we let men speak for men, and whether they be one man in the film is a father who has a young son who thinks he's a woman. We interviewed Dr. Oz Hakim, who's a psychiatrist who spent his career in the United Kingdom working with these types of gender confused people, sex confused. I'm trying to get away from using gender. I've listened to you and Zach. But Joe says some really good things on camera. Unfortunately, when you make a film, a lot of things that are really good that get said don't make it into the film. But I thought one thing he said was really good is that, these young kids, when they're going from young children through puberty into adolescence, young adulthood, when they get trapped in this, cult, crazy way of thinking, about biology, they put away the tasks of adolescence. And what are the tasks of adolescence? Is finding out what you want to do, what you want to study, what kind of work do you want to do, how do you want to grow up and support yourself, and what kind of life do you want to have as an adult. And those are the things that are happening, or should be happening, in adolescence. You don't wake up and be 25 and go, oh, what do I want to do for a living?
I want to be an investment banker.
Back to school I go. So that was really fun to sit down with Joe and get him on camera, because he's clearly spent a lot of his clinical practice working with these predominantly young boys and young girls too, but it's fun.
Yeah. It's so important to remember those fundamental things about adolescence and about that transition period, for lack of a better term, between childhood and adulthood, and all that time in between. In the popular culture, as a filmmaker, I'm sure you're aware, we're inundated with what it means to be a teen is to be reckless, is to be, spontaneous and cool and go on these misadventures and all this stuff. But there's never any thought to preparation or anything.
Yeah. And both of those are necessary parts of adolescence. And I think, and Dr. Hakim speaks to this in the film too, that this trans ideology movement, for lack of a better thing to call it, is a new form of teenage rebellion. There used to be, doing all kinds of, tattooing all over yourself, or piercings, or, there's just always something that teenagers, in in the olden days, teenagers smoked, snuck alcohol and smoked, things like that. And then it kind of got, more, every new generation has to find their new way to rebel, listening to music that your parents hate. The sad thing is that this rebellious activity has long-term negative health consequences, and things that are irreversible oftentimes.
Yeah. I think you just kind of made me realize something. Like, this brings to mind, Orwell, and how in the book he describes, the young people were really taking advantage of this opportunity to use this ideology to really throw it back at the adults and the former authority. And it's a different way of rebelling against authority, because then they become the authority in this without having any means of doing so. They don't have to have any experience in anything. They don't have to learn anything, really. They just have to slap on a label, because even with their own labels and their own, oh, this is what asexual means, and this is a demi-boy, and this is trans femme, and it's like, but then if you challenge them on, oh, okay, so that's pretty rigid, they're like, no, you can actually be anything. Any of those can mean anything for you. It's just, that's how you want to classify yourself. So they don't have to learn anything. And yet they become this ultimate authority that gets to lecture everybody else and really throw it back in their faces. And so it's like a shortcut, kind of.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And, we still live with that. I was following the Twitter, I can't say Twitter, but the X space with Dr. Ian Copeland and Zachary and Colin Wright. And, he has a PhD. Now people are calling into questions the legitimacy of his PhD, but even the experts, sometimes, we'll try to take ground that they have, they're on sinking sand, but they try to stake their claim. And but it's a really upside down world. And my world, I wasn't even planning to get involved in this whole issue of trans ideology. Even though my background, I was a nurse, so I know very well biology, and as a pediatric nurse, I took care of kids that were born with intersex issues, rare that they are, but it was, because most of my previous work with the Center for Bioethics and Culture was in the area of assisted reproductive technologies, and that sort of encroached into the trans stuff when I found out that they were offering, fertility preservation to, minor prepossession, boys and girls. And then I thought, in my passion in this whole space is the science and the medicine. Yeah, it's not the cultural critique of, rebellion, teenage rebellion or anything. I mean, those are important issues, but for me, what gets me up and excited to get out of bed in the morning and work in this space is kind of what you guys are doing, is, speaking to the actual facts, the biological facts. And to me, it's the biological facts coupled with medical ethics. So it's a strange, kind of collision. And then I get myself into trouble on platforms because of my stance on surrogacy.
I met one of your fans the other day. That was fun. They seem really stable and cool. Definitely not crazy.
It's a mad playground out there.
It's really
like
interesting because
have you read Lord of the Flies?
Yes, I have.
It's kind of like, who has the college, who gets to speak?
Yes, exactly. Oh, they've been running with that conch for a while. But yeah, the surrogacy, I guess anti-surrogacy advocacy that you do really opened my eyes. Like, I used to be very pro-surrogacy, I guess because I didn't know. I think so much of this, like, pro-surrogacy, pro-trans, all of this stuff that touches in, like, on medical stuff, like these big medical realms, we're just not informed. But they market it as this, like, super easy, like, wonderful thing. I was considering doing surrogacy to try and have pregnancy, like treat my endometriosis. And my mom was kind of pushing that on me too. And people were like, yeah, and you can pay off your student loans and this, that. And so but it's marketed that way towards young women. And it's really like not safe. Like it's not something you should do lightly at all.
Well, and it's funny because, when you're in a particular lane, like us working in the trans lane, we are very skeptical of the medical profession. We're very skeptical of their expertise. We're very skeptical of their ethics. We're very skeptical of their willingness to do things because of profit motives, which is not really what doctors should operate under. Doing things because, I can make a lot of money if I do, double mastectomies on all the little young girls. There was a lot of skepticism around medicine with the COVID vaccines. And this rush that you've got to get vaccinated, you've got to, to take, to be a good citizen, to, practice good public health, to be concerned about your neighbor and your fellow human beings. So there's all these areas where we're really skeptical, but then in the whole, what I call big fertility space, which is one of the most lucrative fields of medicine, there's like no skepticism. It's just like, babies. Oh, babies, such good parents. Oh, babies,
Yeah.
So it's an uphill battle because of babies and people, by and large, whether they have them or they want them is irrelevant. But by and large, people usually go, oh, babies, and there's that kind of cute. So it's been a challenge. And, I always say, like, ethically, we have to start our thinking at the beginning, not in the middle. And so big fertility and big trans too has started in the middle with, these marketing, and big trans is you got to do it or they're going to kill themselves.
Right.
You've got to let them try it because if they change their mind, it's reversible. It's all that, and then the same with big fertility, like they start in the middle. Oh, this desperate couple why shouldn't we help them? They'd be great parents, but we have to start at the middle. I mean, at the beginning and not in the middle with the feelings part.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to walk people back on all these areas where, same thing with the rollout of the public health, COVID, the handling of the pandemic. We have to start at the beginning of what is good, proper public health and what is our individual role and our collective role in public health, and how do we allow for conscientious objectors in the in the space of vaccination. Not for we're expecting our first grandchild, and I was pediatric nurse in me was looking at what the state of California requires of newborns to get vaccinated with, and it's insane. Newborns at 6 months of age in the state of California have to get their first COVID vaccine.
Really?
If they want to go into any kind of daycare or or eventually school. Like if you want to get your kids in school eventually, they have to have their COVID vaccine and they have to have their booster at 12 months. I know. And I'm not a vaccine skeptic. I'm not anti-vax, but I'm pro, one size does not fit all.
Right.
And what one person might need for their health does not mean everybody has to do it the same way. So, anyway, that's it. So I always encourage you to start at the beginning. And think about, if we do this, like the Chesterton Spence phrase, you don't want to tear something down if you don't know what the consequences are going to be of removing that. There's a lot of times we go in and we just tear something out and then we go, oh my God, now it's flooding over here. Because we didn't know if we removed that bridge or that wall over here, it would cause problems over here. And I'm sure because Zachary's background is in architecture, he understands if you want to build something or move something or change structurally something, you have to understand what's that going to do. With unintended consequences or things that might come up that we're not sure about.
Yeah, exactly. And we're definitely not doing that right now. I think a good example of that, it's something you touched on, was the fertility preservation in these minors. And I remember being at the conference with you and Jamie Reed, the whistleblower from the gender clinic, and like everyone in the audience, as she was describing these procedures that are performed on children, prepubescent children, just looked like they were going to vomit. Like it was so, it felt like something out of a horror movie, like what she was describing. And then the fact that a lot of times these treatments don't even work to preserve the fertility. And I've read that from like subreddits and things about trans kids and how, oh, well, now that their fertility treatment that we did was for nothing because we couldn't preserve the sperm or we couldn't preserve the egg after all. It didn't work. So I don't know if you want to
and that
describe
actually
that whole process.
I gave a larger talk on that topic at the GenSpec conference in Denver this past November. And maybe in your show notes you can put a link to that because GenSpec has slowly been releasing all the different individual talks from that conference. And two of my colleagues and I
during that conference.
Yeah, two of my colleagues and I have submitted a manuscript for publication on fertility preservation as part of gender affirmation care. And, I have been, obviously because of my work in assisted reproductive technology, I have been studying and writing about fertility preservation, fertility issues for years. And, what started out as, again, something that started out as good, there were farmers were using it to preserve their livestock. In case of a big pandemic that would wipe out all your livestock, you could have sperm and egg of your cattle, or pigs, frozen.
Yeah.
It was used, it still is used in, preserving endangered species, species that are at risk of going extinct, certain type of animals, so they'll preserve the gametes of those animals in hopes of keeping a certain type of, animal not from going extinct. Then it moved into cancer patients, before your chemo and radiation, for women and men, should we freeze and bank your gametes so that your chemo and radiation might not destroy your fertility, we can preserve it. Then it moved into pediatric cancer patients. And so we sort of walked through that history of fertility preservation and then look at going into offering it to, the gender affirmation approach. And it's a highly failed endeavor, especially when you're dealing with children, pediatric populations. And in the medical literature, we found no cases whatsoever of young boys having a successful live birth reported. And we had 3 cases of young girls. And again, these are patients, kids that were sick that had to have some kind of treatment. And we found 3 cases reported in the medical literature of young girls that were able to go on and conceive and have a live birth. One of the young girls actually had to go through IVF a few times in order to conceive. But that's not a robust success rate.
No.
And we don't know how many pediatric kids that are offered it to preserve their fertility, offered it, choose it. So we have no basis. 3 against 1 million chose it. 3 against 3 chose it. So there's not a lot of good. But when you offer this to children in the doctor's office with your parents there, because your parents have to consent, you should rightly assume if your doctor's offering something to you that it's beneficial.
Right.
Versus, would you like to freeze and bank your sperm, even though we know you'll probably never be able to have a child using your frozen gametes or your frozen tissue, because if you're prepubescent, they freeze ovarian tissue or they freeze testicular tissue because there's no gametes that are mature yet to freeze. So
right. And then
to wrap it.
Jamie was talking about how they later will reattach that to your body, but not where it was before, but on a different part of your body so that it can grow and mature and get blood flow to it. And then it still doesn't really seem to work. It's just,
because of the young,
they're doing this to kids.
Because of the young boy, his part of his treatment, in quotes, is to remove his gonads, to castrate him. So you can't transplant the testicular tissue back in the testes because they're gone. So you have to transplant them somewhere and hope that they'll graft on, and then that they'll come back to life. So, and then there's the whole area that I talked about a bit at the GenSpec conference, which is people that weren't offered fertility preservation that go on to have cross-sex hormones and surgeries, what's available to them? Do they go off their testosterone or estrogen and hope that their gametes, if they haven't been removed, magically, return to health and do what, and I think that's not the case. I just posted an article today that I got in my inbox, which is on trans men ovaries or something. It's like, it's like I had whiplash, when you see, but it was, talking about, women who've been taking high dose testosterone and then going off the testosterone, and do the ovaries begin to function and produce, normal follicles that then go on and develop into mature eggs, and this particular study reported that it's not the case, that there's been, my words, too much damage that's been done, that they're not restored.
Well, we have seen how any kind of thought to the baby that would be developing with trans men has gone out the window. Any thought to health surrounding fertility has gone out the window when there's a trans-identified person in general. It's all this magical thinking that, oh, well, it's okay if these exogenous hormones damage a fetus, because then, who needs to be born normal anyway? That's so weird. Or when we do have things like IVF, one of the drugs you're encouraged to take as a surrogate, a gestational surrogate, is Lupron. And we've seen that can be extremely damaging to women's health with the class action lawsuits and things like that against Lupron. So it's just weird. It's like this whole other sector of medicine and healthcare that doesn't care about health. Like, it's really strange. I don't understand it. When I was pregnant, and I'm sure you went through the same thing when you had your children, it was so like, you can't eat this, you can't eat that, you have to make sure you're drinking this much water, and you have to be so careful. I actually ended up in the ER because I was having cramping and bleeding because I wasn't drinking enough water, and I wasn't able to keep food down, so I was constantly dehydrated. And that was pretty late in the pregnancy, so they were like, you have to like force yourself to start drinking. I was losing a ton of weight. And it was scary because there's this like balance you have to maintain. It's so delicate, and they're just acting like that's not the case or the situation at all. And it's like, well, some people might have some normal babies and some success that way, but clearly, like, if we could just throw caution to the wind and go about it however we choose, then we wouldn't have these precautions in the first place, right?
Well,
so the question is like, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what really drives, my passion, is trying to get medicine back to practicing medicine and not this service provider. Oh, you want this, you want that, you want your testicles removed, you want your breast removed, whatever. I'm just here to fill orders. And egg donors, because I've done a lot of work with women who donate, and I say donate lightly because they're paid. They're not donating their eggs, they're selling them. They take Lupron as well. And one of my earlier films is called Eggsploitation, EGGS, Eggsploitation. And two of the women in that film had massive strokes, that was directly related to their Lupron, dosage that they were given. And the strokes caused them to permanently lose their own fertility. So in their selling their eggs to help somebody else have a baby, these two women will never ever be able to have their own children, because, we know in women, all of our, hormones and stuff are regulated in our brain, and their strokes, were in their brain. And so they will forever have to take fertility drugs because their stroke, made their brains not produce, the hormones that they, for our cycles. So there's so much irony. And again, you think, what has happened to medicine?
Right. Is it medicine? That was the question I was going to ask you. Yeah. Like, is it medicine anymore?
Yeah. When I was working in the hospital, before I left nursing, I would just, almost always work at university hospitals, so teaching hospitals. We get the medical students in every year and the new residents, and they'd all come through. And then my last couple of years, I would always just kind of quiz the incoming newbies, and say, how do you see your role as a physician? Do you see yourself as somebody who's providing for, health and well-being, or do you see yourself as a service provider? And overwhelmingly, they just saw themselves as service providers. The patient comes in, they've done their Google research, and they say, "Doctor, I think I have this. I'd like you to order this test," And I thought, well, that's really unfortunate. Because if you don't understand what your role and your obligation is to your patient, and in the case of third-party conception, using women as donors for eggs or surrogate, these women aren't patients. So we don't know what normal and good doses are to put a person on Lupron. I mean, on one level, you could say, okay, if we're going to use Lupron to treat precocious puberty, young children that go into puberty like really, really early, say you're 5 or 6 and you're going into puberty, and maybe the doc, they will already have sort of a standard of care for what dosage, the same with, other people, men with end-stage prostate cancer, we kind of know what kind of dosage we might use on that patient population. But when you have somebody who has no medical need for a drug, what's the dosage?
That's a very good point. Yeah, people act like, well, you just take the drug and it's fine, and everybody just knows. It's like, no, they don't actually. It's pretty crazy how cavalier.
It's the same with the trans stuff. How much estrogen should we put in a male body? In the Detransition Diaries, Helena Kirshner, who's one of the young women in that film, she used to be very, very active on Twitter. She basically went into her Planned Parenthood provider and said, "I want you to put me on the highest dosage possible." I mean, here's a teenage girl telling the medical professionals what dose of estrogen she wants. And she says on camera, "Well, I had big breasts and I had big hips, and, a curvy kind of a girl body. So give me the most you can give me." They're like, "Okay."
Oh my gosh.
It's crazy.
It is, especially since, the people who are going to be the least responsible with this are going to be teenagers. Like, they don't know. Like, it's adults don't know. Adults do, we don't have time unless we're in the field to look into this stuff, or if they take it up as a cause or something. But it's so, I don't want to say guarded, but it is kind of kept behind, like, a lot of information. Like, there's a lot of things you have to understand in order to be able to understand why dosing instructions are the way they are, and sex plays a part in that. And you have to understand, especially when it comes to hormones and things like that, how they affect the body. And it's like they don't care. Like, they're treating it like it's a B12 supplement or something. I was talking to Quentin Van Meter about puberty blockers and the precocious puberty versus puberty blockers given for gender affirming care. And he was saying that the reason why puberty blockers are still considered okay, although they're still not recommended, because even that's like a guess. They guess that you're going to start your period at this point, or that you're going to enter this state of puberty at this point based on other factors. The reason they give them earlier instead of later is because that calcium draw hasn't started as part of the cascade of puberty. So for whatever reason, that doesn't seem to start until later, even if you go into precocious puberty and things like that. So that's why they don't give those, like, to the precocious puberty later and to the trans kids, quote unquote, like earlier. But it's really crazy. I don't understand how we got here. I just don't. There's no protocol.
Yeah. Well, I think several factors. I mean, one is the sort of the erosion of medical ethics. medicine sort of shifting. And, I'm old enough to remember the early days of being a nurse, where we still had doctors and patients and nurses and respiratory therapists. And when I left, the last hospital I worked with, we were instructed to call our patients our clients. They were our clients, they were our customers. We were service providers. We're providing a service, and these are our customers. So, and you get all those. At hospitals, we had customer satisfaction surveys. So when you were discharged from the hospital, you were given a survey. How did you like your service? How pleased were you? I personally have Kaiser as my healthcare. I just saw my doctor last week. Within 24 hours, I had an online email. How was your service? How were you greeted? Did you feel like they listened to you? It was just. So it's almost like rating your hotel. Did you like the pillows? Was the room comfortable?
I also went to Kaiser. I remember things like that.
Yeah. So, and I think, if you follow the work of like James Lindsay and the whole critical race theory and the queer theory and sort of the breakdown of structures, that we understood what a man was, we understood what a female was, we had all these, shared understandings, and then, queer theory came in and just blurred everything, like you were saying earlier, we have fluidity and demi this, and, it's just like,
but they can all mean anything, so it doesn't even matter.
And we're a very, we like money in the United States. So if there's money to be made, we'll throw ethics out the window. We'll throw facts out the window. And I do think that there is a strong agenda from these ideologues, WPATH and, the HRC, big groups like that, ACLU. I mean, they were fine just fighting for gay marriage. And then once they got gay marriage, they thought, well, we need a new cause. We're not going to close up shop and say, well, we got gay marriage, we can go home now. It's like, no, we need another, and then the rainbow flag became how many iterations of flags have we had now? So I think it's all these things that are kind of in a perfect storm.
Yeah.
But I think the happy ending I think is what, I think I think we will see this one, I won't say in how long, but, in a reasonable period of time. It won't be like 50 years from now. I'm thinking of maybe 5 years from now, maybe even sooner, because I think what we'll see happen is what we're already seeing happen, and it happened in the United Kingdom. It's whistleblowers and it's lawsuits.
Right.
And that often gets the attention. And then a lot of the red states have passed laws that are protecting children, and I saw something just today that Florida's not even going to allow you to identify as a different sex, that your natal sex on your driver's license. You can say you're this, but your driver's license is going to say your natal sex. So.
Right. And I've had that argument with people before, because I know a few trans-identified people, less so now that they've gotten angry with me for various things as my stances have changed. But we've gotten into arguments, and I can argue with somebody about something that I'm very passionate about and still be friends with them and still be civil and everything. And I don't know if their feelings about me changed, but mine haven't changed about them. I still think they're lovely. But we've gotten into arguments about their documentation and things like that. And it's like, well, you're asking for the special privilege for you, but then you don't want to give it to people who you think are, not like you. And it's very subjective, and we can't do things like that. Like, as a society, it's just not tenable. So, and then the argument is, oh, well, if you pass well enough, you can stealth and get into spaces and things like that. And it's like, well, if you pass well enough and you're not going to get caught, then it really doesn't make a huge difference to you, does it? Like, at that point. So it's just this tricky, like, gray area. And I mean, I personally am not for the document changes. I think we should just keep those for everybody's safety, even the people who are trans-identified, because as I've been finding out, if you go into the hospital or the emergency room and you don't disclose your sex because you're unconscious or what have you, and they start performing on you based on the sex they think you are, then
Hmm.
it could lead to deadly consequences.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, just not safe for anybody.
I mean, I spent years in emergency rooms, and patients roll in all the time. They're picked up in an accident, a scene of a
Hmm.
car crash or whatever. They come into the emergency room. They're intoxicated. They're unconscious, whatever. And if you don't immediately know what their sex is, you might not be looking for the right things. You
Right.
might say, "Oh, this is a man," and it's a woman that's got an ectopic pregnancy. You know,
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
you're going, well, this is a man with abdominal pain. Let's see if he's got gallstones or an appendicitis or something. It's just
Right.
you have to have the reality of the patient in front of you so that you can start looking, because there's things, believe it or not, that only women have or only men have, and
Right.
even if there's
Or
the
even
same
kidney
things,
values.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
And that can
it's
be like kidney values. I don't think people realize how integral those are to your health. Like, if your
yeah.
kidneys aren't functioning properly, you're not having a good time. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
but if medicine is just going to be service providers, giving
Right.
services, then I go, okay, well, we'll just chuck that out the window. But if we're going to be people that are concerned with life and death issues and proper treatments so we can deal with, whatever the underlying disease or illness is, then we have to have, the facts.
Right. It's almost like it's a separate branch of, I don't even want to call it medicine, but some kind of extreme service or something, body modification service, because, there's that aspect where if you have a certain identification, you get whatever you want on demand. All the ethics go out the window. You're pregnant, whatever, it doesn't matter. What you want matters. And we don't care about the baby. We don't care about this. As long as you get your trans joy. But on the flip side, I have a friend who got a little bit of viral fame on the internet because she had really terrible endometriosis to where she was
Mhm.
passing out. She could not have any kind of quality of life because of constant blood loss and things like that. And so she really wanted to get a hysterectomy to stop that because she's a lesbian. She'd never want to get pregnant. She was in her 30s. Like, she was like,
Mhm.
nope, I'm sure. And
Yeah.
so they kept refusing and refusing and refusing to give her this hysterectomy. And eventually she just told them, you know what? I'm trans. I want my hysterectomy. And they gave it to her immediately.
Wow. Wow.
So, which then it kind of like caught her off guard because they didn't remove the ovaries, but they just removed the uterus. So later she ended up having another major health incident and had to get the ovaries removed as well. Um,
Um,
so it was
wow.
just crazy. She's doing a lot better now, but it
Yeah.
like
I
the
mean,
fact
that
that she
is
had to
really,
do that.
yeah, that is really crazy. And it's sad to hear those kind of stories to me because, on one hand, the endometriosis is a is a medical need. But,
Mm-hmm.
just I want my uterus out because I'm a man, that's not a medical need.
Right.
And, and
Right.
I'm one of those that's against medicine doing this for adults. I mean, I know in this debate, we
Yeah.
peacefully live amongst others that say, okay, for adults, you're okay, you can do whatever you want. But to me, I say that's not the role of proper medicine. If you want to go
Right.
tattoo your body head to toe, go to the tattoo parlor. If you want to get Botox and
Yeah.
fillers and feminize or go to the med spa. Go,
Mm-hmm.
go to the laser hair removal clinic to have your body hair removed if you want to, look more soft and feminine.
Yeah.
But as far as chopping off, cutting off, healthy breasts or healthy genitalia, those are integral body parts that, body systems. We're a system.
Yeah.
We're not just an arm, we're
Yeah.
not just a leg, we're not just a heart, we're a system, and they play
Right. I
important
mean,
roles in our development even as we get older.
yeah, that's where we are now, though, is I've seen the ethical question played around with in some articles of, is it okay to amputate some legs if somebody just doesn't want them anymore? They think, they'd be better off or happier without them. Or the woman who blinded herself with bleach to identify as blind because she's
Mm.
so like desperately. And it's like that woman is in desperate need of mental health care. Like,
Yeah.
that's not something we should be fostering. And then you get the libertarian crowd in there, quote unquote
Mm-hmm.
libertarian. That's like bodily autonomy. Once you're 18, go for it. And it's like, aren't you the same party that was kind of low key advocating for child labor? Like, so, like,
Yeah. Well, you get that a lot in the, you want to be a
wonder.
surrogate, you want to sell your eggs, but it's your body, you can
Yeah.
do whatever you want. And I go, okay, fine. I can get that it's your body, you can do whatever you want with it.
Mm-hmm.
However, medicine is not going to help you do whatever you want with it because it's not
Yeah.
their job, their professional duty to do that for you. Like
That's
I
a
say,
good
go to
point.
the med spa if you want to pay somebody to put silicone, pump your lips up fat, or do
Mm-hmm.
whatever, body hair
Yeah.
removal. But I draw a pretty firm. Ethics is about drawing lines, and the brighter the lines are, the clearer the
Right.
boundary is. And to me, that's a really bright line. And I'm with you
Yeah.
that people that really feel like I should really be taller, you can put extensions in legs, cut the
Mm-hmm.
bones and put bones so you can. I really want to be 6'7" so I can play basketball.
Yeah.
That's not the purview of medicine.
Yeah, no, I really think it's just something else. It's not medicine at that point. And clearly, the medical profession agrees, or they would have just given my friend, for example, the hysterectomy for her endometriosis. But clearly, there were some ethical issues with that, and they wanted to make sure that her fertility was preserved because they knew that that could be a concern up ahead and all of these different
Mm-hmm.
things. And they were being really cautious and safeguarding in that regard, even though like her health was, kind of questionable as to which option was better. But they were erring on the side of maintaining what was there and trying to preserve that as much as possible. And I understand that outlook. But yeah, it also calls into question what is mental health and at what point is someone able to consent? Because if
Mm-hmm.
you're wanting to cut off your limbs or blind yourself or whatever, you're clearly not mentally well. And I don't think that that should allow you to consent to something like that. So
Yeah. And when you
it's,
look at some of the
yeah,
studies and surveys of, especially in the space of, young teens, young children, there's a lot of comorbidities that these children have, whether it be
yeah.
trauma, abuse, bullying, autism, pornography use,
Mm-hmm.
trauma in the home, trauma at school. There's so many things you
Yeah.
can't tease out. And I even push back on the narrative, just leave these kids alone because most of them will just grow up to be gay. Well, we don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Because
That's
there's so
true.
many
Yeah.
comorbidities. We need to do a study, and we need to like have a
Right.
control group, and then we'd have to let some kids grow up and some kids get trans. But I don't like
Yeah.
using children as human experiments to figure that out
Right.
because
Like there
I
are
just always
ethics
say,
against that as well. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they may be children that grow up to be same-sex attracted to be gay, or they may not, or they may be kids that grow up to have ongoing mental health problems, as they have now,
Right.
that, will constantly need counseling and therapy, or, or to get through trauma or abuse that they've had in their past. Or they may just grow out of it and just be, quirky little people that are,
Yeah.
just don't fall
Yeah.
into stereotypical male, female, whatever those even are. And we don't let kids have that freedom anymore. We're
No.
we're so progressive, but the
Yeah.
trans movement just wants to say, okay, if you're not this kind of a boy, then you're a girl. If you're not this
Yeah.
kind of a girl, then you're a boy. It's like, well,
I
no, I
love
can be a
the
tomboy girl.
yeah, I love looking at history, like historical figures, like women who helped shape the West, or women during the Dust Bowl, or women from other countries that, gathered everybody together and like led a charge for rights or something, because they're usually women that were very atypical and just kind of did everything and wore pants and didn't care. And they like, and
Milk
it's
cows.
great. Yeah, and it's great to see that. And then conversely, we have men that didn't fit stereotypes either, like Houdini. And oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of this illusionist, but he's another illusionist. And there's like some big treasure thing associated with him.
No.
And so, yeah, just these like quirky weird people that just didn't fit the mold, and they just made their own way. And that's so cool. Those are great stories to show kids.
Yeah.
And we aren't showing them that. Instead, we've got these art images of like with all the cutting scars and everything, and the mastectomy scars, like, oh, trans is beautiful. It's like, it looks like a sacrificial death cult. Or like that one image in the UK of that poor girl that had all those cuts all the way up both arms.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, oh, this is trans joy, and you know, oh, he's himself. And it's this poor young woman that obviously had a lot of trauma and things going on in her life. And it's like, no, like, we need to really foster what makes these kids unique, like, without throwing labels at them left and right.
Yeah.
I really want to get back to that place. That'd be great.
Yeah. I know. It's amazing. Amazing frontier. I have a picture of my grandmother who taught first grade for like forever. And she was unique at a time when women didn't divorce. As a young mother of two sons, she divorced. So she was a single mom, in the 30s and 40s, which is pretty much unheard of. And I have this cool picture of her, black and white picture of her in front of her one-room schoolhouse where she taught. And it was clear, she had like 50 kids in this picture. And they were from like little tiny kids to, teenagers. I mean, she taught all the children. Many of them didn't have shoes on. It was clearly a very, a rural West Virginia one-room schoolhouse. And I think, what a badass woman my grandmother was.
Yeah. I have some of my great grandmother from Cuba, and one of them, she's younger, and she had a pretty like progressive husband that just kind of like let her do what she wanted. And so she's got this one photo where it's her and these two pistols, like 6-shooters on her hips. And then I've got another one of her from like the early 80s. It's her and my other great grandmother, and they've both got these huge machetes. It's like chopping down trees at my grandfather's property. And it's like, yeah, let's get back to that. Like,
well, it's funny because, one of the things that Joe Virgo said when we were interviewing him, and sadly, again, it didn't make it into the film, but he, kind of said, when I'm working with parents, some of the advice I give them is, if you can, take your children and leave the country. Just remove them from the environment. And you see this is huge, like in the U.S., maybe elsewhere, this homestead movement. Where people are, moving like off the grid, and they've got their generators, and they're going to West Virginia where they can buy acres and land, and they're farming. And part of that, I think, came about the pandemic, when a lot of people had more freedom to work from home. And, they wanted to feel like they had more control over, what they could and couldn't do. And, but, there is a sort of a longing for that, those kind of role models for children, the rugged early American that were coming across the country in wagon wheels and, dragging their little children behind.
Yeah, it was the great thing about American history is that kind of forging your own path in more than one way. Like, not just a physical path, but also the path of your life. Like, you can just make of yourself anything. You don't have to conform to anybody's stupid labels and standards or anything. Yeah. So long as you're not hurting anybody. Yeah.
And that's a little bit what the trans movement is. Like, I can forge my own identity. I can do all these great and wonderful things. But I say, but however, you're doing things that have lifelong negative health complications. Yeah. Sure, the early pioneers knew that they were risking their life, but their life was risked for the hope of a better future, for their family, to build a new town or build a new community or whatnot. And these children are in their confusion and thinking that this is like forging my identity.
Yeah, and it's that shortcut again. It's like, all I got to do is slap on some labels and I'm good. Everything's
Chop
better.
Off my breast.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I am seeing more of a shift with the younger people that are relatives or friends of the family, and basically, as more people know what we've been doing, more people have been like, hey, so can you talk to my, son or daughter or whatever? And so then what I'm seeing more of now is just the label for the sake of the label. And then so they can say that they're trans. And so I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, so that's getting better. At least they're realizing so even in the culture with the young people, it seems like we're already starting to roll back let's go straight for medicalizing. Let's go straight for this and that. That's a little extreme. So I'm hoping that we will see
Yeah.
more of that and it will just kind of be more of like an alternative. I'm just going to dye my hair thing again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just rebel against my parents by getting purple hair and a couple extra piercings or
Yeah.
something. Yeah. Well, let's hope. Like I said, I do think that we will see this rolled back in not too
I do
distant
too.
future. I'm not going to take that and bet on it and go to the slot machines and bet
Yeah.
on that. But that is my prediction, and I think it's only because you can only sustain something that's so permanently harmful to your health for so long. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
smoking. In the olden days, everybody was like, "Oh, smoking doesn't cause any damage. Smoke,
Yeah.
smoke, smoke." And slowly but surely, we realized, no, smoking is really not good. And then, we
Oddly
had this huge
enough,
campaign to stop smoking. Don't
yeah.
smoke.
The New York Times broke those stories back then about how damaging smoking was to your health and stuff like that. And it totally crippled the ad industry around cigarettes.
Yeah, and
So
Big Tobacco
yeah.
wasn't too happy either. And it's the same with Big
Yeah.
Trans. They don't want to hear, that's why they say all the detransition stories that those are rare. Those people weren't trans anyway, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, no, the evidence is mounting, and soon enough,
Yeah. They're
it's
just
like,
holding back the door like it's fine.
mhm, yeah. And
Yeah.
once people
But
realize, people are waking up. I mean, they're hearing podcasts
yeah.
like yours and Benjamin Voices and all
Yeah.
the people out there that are talking about this. And
Well, and
watch.
thanks to films like yours that are shedding light on all these things. And that's
Yeah.
such a valuable contribution. Like,
Well,
thank
what's
you so
really
much for
cool?
producing all those.
Because when you post your films online, you get a lot of data, which is great. And we hired a digital social media company to run a campaign on the film, so we get pretty good analytics because we're running targeted ads. And the
Oh,
number
wow.
one top demographic that's watching the film, because there's the trailer, and then we pulled out 6 or 7 short little clips, and have all these different
Mm-hmm.
pieces of the film that are being teased out with paid ad revenue. And it's the young demographic. It's the 20s to early 30s that are the top watchers of the film, which is great
Wow.
because that's who we made it for.
Yeah.
We didn't. Secondary markets are, yes, we made it for parents. Secondary markets, yes,
Yeah.
we made it for educators, lawmakers. Those are secondary markets. But our primary audience that we wanted to watch this film was young people, because they're
That's
either
great.
this is their personal struggle or their friend's struggle, or they
Yeah.
are just aware of it for their friend group. So we're happy to see that
Yeah.
that's, I mean, other people are watching it too, but that's the top demographic for
That's
watching the
great to
film.
hear.
Like
That's
parents
really
are
good to
watching.
hear.
Dr. Joe Burgo is grabbing the parents' attention because
That's
parents
good.
want to know, what do the experts say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the young people want to know, what do the young boys say that did this? I want to hear
Yeah.
from my
Yeah.
peers. So, which makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. It does. But thank you so much for coming on today and for talking with us and sharing so much about your experience.
Yeah,
And
and I
we
enjoyed meeting you
hopefully will
guys
do
in
this again.
person. I love meeting
Yes,
you guys
that
in
was
person, so that was
awesome.
fun. It's always fun to meet people in
Yes,
person. Well, thank you for having me.
definitely.